Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Goodness Village podcast. My name is Hunter Van Dam, and I am very, very excited to share that we have a special bonus episode for you. A few weeks ago, Goodness Village had the opportunity to co-host an event with Kevin F Adler, an award-winning social entrepreneur and the author of the new book, When We Walk By, a guide to understanding housing instability, supporting our unhoused neighbors, and reclaiming our humanity. Kevin is also the founder and CEO of Miracle Messages, a nonprofit that helps people experiencing homelessness rebuild their social support systems and financial security through family reunification services, a phone buddy program, and the first basic income pilot for unhoused individuals in the U.S. During this live event, our very own Kim Curtis sat down with and interviewed Kevin about his new book and his experiences serving our unhoused neighbors. While this episode is a bit longer than the other ones, it's definitely worth the listen. We hope you enjoyed this bonus episode of The Good Pod.
Hi, everybody. We're going to kind of hang out with you for just a couple minutes while we let some stragglers roll through the door. So we'll just kind of say hi. And I'll tell you a little bit about me because I think that most of you know about me, so anybody that struggles in won't miss about him. Right? Feels like a good way to start. So I'm Kim Curtis. I am the executive director of the Goodness Village that is on this property. I don't know if everybody knows about us, but we do have the tiny homes right behind the red buildings over there, and they are for our formerly unsheltered individuals from the Tri-Valley. We have 28 neighbors that reside over there, and 64% of that, which is 18, are the same folks that moved in 2.5 years ago, which for this population is not typical. And so we're really excited to still have our neighbors with us and residing and thriving in the village. And then this is Kevin. You want to tell a little bit about yourself?
Okay, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. It's good to be back in Livermore, my hometown. Let's go, Livermore. Come on. I used to say Livermorons, but the mayor is here, so I can't refer to us that way right now. So high class Livermore. I grew up in Springtown. Went to Livermore High, Christensen Middle School, Christensen Elementary School back in the day, K to 12. Since then I've moved. I was in San Francisco for a while, Los Angeles, and for the last decade I've run a nonprofit called Miracle Messages. We help people who are experiencing homelessness rebuild their social support systems and their financial security. So what we do is we do three things: family reunification services. We've done about 800 reunifications, helping folks who haven't seen family, sometimes in decades, record messages to their long-lost loved ones. We have a network of volunteer digital detectives. So does anyone here have a son or daughter who's like teenage, kind of like 16, 17? I know you're good at digital sleuthing, if that's you, because you're on the internet already. Like, who are you going out with this Friday night? Okay, I'm going to search. So that's our digital detective work, and we find family all around the world. Second program is our phone buddy program, where we match everyday volunteers all around the world for weekly phone calls and text messages with unhoused neighbors, kind of like a Big Brothers, Big Sisters program for our unhoused neighbors. I'll plug this a few times, but we currently have a wait list of 36 unhoused neighbors waiting for volunteers. 20 minutes, 30 minutes a week, phone calls and text messages. You get assigned a phone number through our partnership with DialPad, so you don't need to reveal your personal device phone number. It's all through the app. Phone calls, text messages. We have weekly support calls, weekly trainings, and then there's a call log, so you can actually fill out the call log anytime you have a conversation and get help if you need from a caseworker. And then our third program is our basic income program, where we are giving out right now more than $1 million in direct cash transfers to unhoused neighbors around the state of California. So we'll share more about that in a minute, but yeah, it's great to be here. I grew up going to Cornerstone Fellowship across the way. before Crosswinds was the church, and then have a background as a social entrepreneur and as a sociologist. So
He's pretty rad, right? I didn't know we were going to go all the way back to our childhood, so I'm going to back up.
Yeah,
so I was born in...
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in San Leandro.
San Leandro. The Dro.
Yeah,
Not the Zoe, the Dro.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm a Dro.
Yeah.
Yep. San Lee, as I like to call it, just because I like to be different, not San Lo. So I want to share with you a little bit about how I came to learn about Kevin, but I want to do that after Kevin shares with you. He has a way of bringing a room together whenever he talks, and he has a specific way of doing it. So maybe you could start there with your question. Yeah, with your 2 questions, and then we can go back and talk about how I got to know
Kim's
about
just
you.
making stuff up as we go along. I'm like, okay, Kim.
If you know me, you know that I do that.
In the moment. So 2 questions I'd like to ask. So show of hands. Raise your hand if you care about the issue of homelessness. Okay, not a trick question. Every hand went up. That's great. Colette, your hand was up. She works with me. Okay. She didn't raise her hand. She's like, I've heard this before. Second question. Raise your hand if you know someone that's currently experiencing homelessness, as a friend, as a neighbor. Okay. So thank you for raising your hands. When I ask that question, it's about the ratio that we just saw. It's never more than about 5% or 10% of people. That everyone cares about homelessness, but very few of us know someone by name as a friend, as a neighbor who's experiencing homelessness. And I think that's part of the issue, is we don't know who they are. And so we can talk about this issue till we're blue in the face, but as long as we're seeing homelessness as a monolith, the homeless, we would never look at each other as a crowd of the housed. And yet we've defined an entire group of people by their lack of one physical need. We would never do that to each other, even though we have that physical need. But we've defined them by their lack of one thing. And in the book, one of the key arguments is we have to get past the us versus them narrative around homelessness. The simple way I put it is to see people experiencing homelessness not as problems to be solved, but as people to be loved. Because when you love people, you get close enough, you do what Brian Stevenson from Just Mercy talks about of getting proximate, getting relational. You get close enough to actually see what's going on, hear their problems, use your brain to say, well, gosh, that sounds like a challenging situation. Have you thought about this? Can we work together on that? Can I reach out? So one call to action, whether it's through miracle messages or not, is by the end of the year. You got a month. It's Christmas, holiday season. Just get to know a neighbor experiencing homelessness and be able to raise your hand. So,
Yeah, I'm always intrigued by how many of us are drawn to this and we want to do something, and then how many people get stuck in that fear of how do I have that conversation? How do I make that first step? And that's definitely something that I want you to share in the next piece after I share about how I got to know Kevin. And actually just, I joke because I didn't actually meet Kevin. In 2014, he was on the news. And that's how I felt like immediate kinship to somebody that was on the news regarding, it was I want to say article, but that's not it. It was a clip about miracle messages and the first person that you had done the outreach. And I want you to tell the story about how that all went down.
Okay. All right, so a little story time. Gather around here, cozy group. So my uncle was homeless for 30 years. That was my starting point on this issue. But, I never thought of Uncle Mark as a homeless man because he was just my beloved uncle. He remembered every birthday. Every year he was on the streets, he sent me a Hallmark card for my birthday. Never missed a birthday. Always just signed Mark in block letters. Guest of honor at Thanksgiving and Christmas. He also suffered from schizophrenia and lived on the streets of Santa Cruz for about 30 years. So after Mark passed away, I started thinking about my interaction or lack thereof with my neighbors experiencing homelessness in San Francisco, where I was living at the time. And again, I started out seeing people experiencing homelessness as problems to be solved, not people to be loved. And when I thought about my Uncle Mark, I thought of him as, all the richness of his personality, the relationship. When I thought about homelessness, it was in a very different sense. And I started just thinking, what would it take to get me, not trying to change the world or anything, to get me to see someone on the streets as someone's son or daughter, brother or sister, some kid's beloved uncle or aunt. So for 1 year, I'm a person of faith, and I had this question that kind of landed on my heart one day sitting in church, which was, how would Jesus use a smartphone? How would Jesus use social media? And I was just struck by this curiosity of saying, how can we use storytelling tools, whether you're a person of faith or not, to show our shared humanity, to kind of reveal, what's going on beyond the cat videos and the selfies. Those are fun, but, we got enough of those. And so my response to that was for 1 year, I invited 24 individuals experiencing homelessness to wear GoPro cameras around their chests and narrate their experience of what life is like on the streets. And the basic premise was pretty simple. I just walked by you. You're still here. What's it like to be you? What do you wish I knew? What do you wish folks knew that maybe we don't? In one of the clips, I heard someone say, I never realized I was homeless when I lost my housing, only when I lost my family and friends. I never realized I was homeless when I lost my housing, only when I lost my family and friends. So, that was like a light bulb moment. I said, that's intuitive, but I've never heard any government agency, any homeless service provider talk about what I've come to call relational poverty as a form of poverty. Isolation, loneliness, disconnectedness, stigma, and shame that often accompanies it. So I thought, okay, if this is true, theoretically, I could just walk down Market Street, go up to every single person I see who's visibly homeless, and just say, do you have any loved ones you'd like to reconnect to? And so 2014, December, walked down Market Street, met a man named Jeffrey, downtown San Francisco. Initially, he didn't seem like he wanted to talk. I kind of just walked by and, one-word responses, and I was about ready to get going. And then I said, Jeffrey, do you have any loved ones you'd like to reconnect to for the holidays? And it was the first time he looked me right in the eye. And he said, my sister, Jennifer, my niece and nephew, my dad, Harold, I haven't seen them in a long time. I'd love your help if you could. And so I said, okay. And not knowing what to do, I basically pulled out my phone and said, would you like to record a video to your family? And he said, yes. So I pull up the phone, hit record. He records this video. I say, thank you. I gather some information from him. And I get home. And I, within a few days, I say, okay, I should try to find his family. What am I going to do with this? So I get on social media, and I did a search. And then there was a Facebook group connected to his hometown. Turns out, like every community in the U.S. has some kind of version of, you're from Livermore if ... We have one too? Y'all don't invite me to the groups. Like, I'm still part of Livermore, guys. So there's a Facebook group for his hometown. You're from, ... And I post the video there with a short note. Within 1 hour, the video shared hundreds of times. Makes the local news that night as a leading story. Classmates start commenting, saying, hey, I went to high school with Jeffrey. I work in construction. Does he need a job? I work at the congressman's office. Does he need health care? Within 1 week, the town came together and raised over $5,000 to try to bring him home. And I got on the phone with his sister the next day, And she told me that Jeffrey had been a missing person for 12 years. It's broad daylight, downtown San Francisco, a few days before Christmas. And so at that point, I said, Jeffrey is not the only one. It shouldn't be happening. And so I started doing that work full time. And my dad was really confused. He's like, what's your full-time job now? I was like, don't worry, it pays really well, Dad. But no, I felt like there was something there that needed to be explored. So that was the starting point. That was the first miracle message. And as a little side note, the name Miracle Message, some folks ask, the town was called Montoursville in Pennsylvania. And Jeffrey's sister, I asked her, what should we call this thing? We, get all these media interviews about this. And she said, well, in town, locally, we call it the Miracle of Montoursville. And she said, I feel like you've given me this miracle message. And so we said, let's call it Miracle Messages. So.
That's incredible. And I think when I saw this clip on the news, for me, it was a moment where I'd been in the field since 2005, and I had worked with a lot of individuals, both unsheltered, but also staff members. And the depth of just a desire to know more beyond just the housing situation that you had for a human and that capacity for compassion, you could see it then and you can still see it now, and the work that you do in the advocacy. And so I just, at that moment, felt like I found a kinship with a human. I just knew that there was somebody else out there that had depth to them and a desire to serve. And so
this work can be done really well, but it can also be done really poorly. And you got to be careful to not be exploitative and voyeuristic. So for folks who don't want to record videos, we do audio message, online form, a paper form. We also have a hotline, which I'm going to give you a phone number that you're never going to forget for the rest of your life. You ready? You don't believe me, but you're never forgetting it. I don't even know my partner's phone number by heart, and I know this phone number. 1-800-MISS-YOU. 1-800-MISSYOU. So if you call 1-800-MISS-YOU, or a caseworker, a social worker, a volunteer, it reaches one of our staff members or one of our volunteers, and we take down the information so we can either help the person reconnect to their loved one or get matched with a phone buddy. So that's our way of being accountable to our unhoused neighbors to be able to always reach us, even as the phone numbers get changed.
that's great. And I'm going to ask you to talk about Ray's experience that's in the book. Not too much that they don't have to read the book, though, so hold back a little bit, okay? Because we want them to get the book because there's so much good information in there. But we talked, you call it relational poverty in your book, and we call it catastrophic loss of family at Goodness Village. And there's a feeling that I think often that people interpret that to be because of something that the unsheltered person, they must have done something wrong. They did a substance. They did something that has alienated them from the family, right? And that's the way we justify them deserving to be without people. And Ray, in your story, talks more about how his shame and his story, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. And I'll just as context to kind of set this up, that's such an important point, Kim. That the narrative of individual responsibility on homelessness must end. It must end. We have all made mistakes. None of us are angels or devils. We all fall short. And our unhoused neighbors are not deservedly poor, right? We have a notion in our country of self-made man, self-made woman. And if that's true, taken to its logical conclusion, you almost have to say, well, are you self-failed? What did you do wrong? And right now, I'll just give you some numbers that stick with me. 1 out of every 2 Americans are a paycheck away from not being able to pay rent. 47% of Americans say they don't know where they'd get $400 for an unexpected emergency. So you almost hear numbers like that, and then you look at, the fact that out of the 3,000 plus counties in the United States, there's not a single county where a person who's working minimum wage job full-time can afford a 2-bedroom apartment, and less than 1% of counties where that same hardworking individual can afford a 1-bedroom apartment. You almost have to ask, well, why aren't tens of millions of people experiencing homelessness? Why aren't there more people experiencing homelessness? And what we're finding is family, friends, community, church, synagogue, mosque, informal economy, relationships, social capital is making up the difference. And so if you don't have that, or you've lost that, or in many cases, your family may be similarly economically depressed in the same situation you're in, it can be very difficult to withstand the next crisis. So let me share a little bit. Should I share about Ray, you think? Okay. Let's see. So, this is at the beginning of the Stigma, Stereotypes, and Shame chapter. So the book is organized, first section is on humanity. So we look at ways in which humanity has fallen short on the issue of homelessness. That's relational poverty, that's hyper-individualism, this idea of self-made, person, exclusion, where half of the cities in the country make it illegal to be homeless. Anti-camping, anti-loitering, anti-sleeping, anti-sitting, even anti-feeding, where there's a story in the book of a World War II veteran in Florida being handcuffed and arrested for feeding people experiencing homelessness. So we've made it illegal to exist if you don't have housing. And then you add in the paternalism, too, this idea that we know better than what they need, and I can get into that in a minute. And then the second section is around the systems, the affordable housing, income inequality, criminal justice system, foster care, where 1 out of every 3 kids who age out of foster care will experience homelessness by the time they're 26 years old. And for Black young people, that goes up to 60%. 60% of Black young people who age out of foster care will experience homelessness by the time they're 26. So it really just shatters any notions of individual responsibility. But for Ray, so in the Stigma chapter, it says, if you met Ray, you would probably first be struck by his unhesitating kindness, quick smile, and genuine humility. But beyond his geniality, Ray's most remarkable characteristic might be the quiet resilience that's defined his life. Ray is a father, a hardworking middle-aged man who was raised in the Philippines among 3 brothers in a home bounded by equal parts strictness and love. By his own admission, Ray lived a pretty normal life until one fateful day when Ray suddenly found himself on the floor of Oakland International Airport, his knees having given way to excruciating pain. Unbeknownst to Ray at the time, the shortness of breath, fatigue, and difficulty walking that he had experienced months prior to his homebound flight to Oakland were the early manifestations of a condition that would come to touch every aspect of his life. When Ray was 42 years old, he was diagnosed with pulmonary congestive heart failure. He was prescribed medication, and shortly after being discharged from the hospital, he returned to work. Ray would often travel to 3 different cities a month, closing business deals day in and day out. Ray recognized that his fast-paced lifestyle was probably incompatible with his diagnosis, but he soldiered on. He had a family to support, rent to pay, a daughter in high school, and no other choice. Less than a year after he fell to the ground at Oakland Airport, Ray once more felt very ill and was again admitted to the hospital for congestive heart failure. This time, Ray was not so lucky. He had a stroke and could no longer continue to work. I just started going downhill from there. It was hard to recover from it. I had to spend time in the hospital. I couldn't spend time at work. I was suffering. My personal life was one where I lived in isolation, trying to avoid being embarrassed because, first of all, I wasn't able to take care of my health. Secondly, I'm not able to hold down my life like I'm expected to. Unable to make his way up a set of stairs, much less hustle through meandering airport terminals en route to the next client meeting, Ray was laid off from his job in sales. He began living off his savings, which he quickly depleted. Unable to pay rent, Ray relinquished his keys to his landlord within months of his stroke. For the next few years, Ray was sick, tired, isolated, and without a home. Because he was living alone in California, away from his teenage daughter and recently separated from his wife, no one knew the extent of Ray's illness or housing predicament. Phone calls and visits from friends and family were masked with downplayed symptoms, concerns of loved ones brushed off with steadfast determination to hide any sign of weakness. Ray was the type of person people depended on. He was never the dependent. He told others he was fine. Everyone believed it, except himself. I took on an attitude that I can handle this on my own. I didn't want to show that I needed help. As family and friends came and visited, I really played it down, and I don't think anyone really got the full scope of the situation of what was going on until later. Not many people, even today, know what I went through. And then the last bit here. As his symptoms worsened, Ray gradually distanced himself from his social circle, carefully crafting a facade of happiness to mask the overwhelming isolation, sadness, depression, and loneliness he harbored from within. His scant remaining savings went to hotel rooms, followed by late-night bus rides to keep warm during the winter, followed by pretending to be a university student so he could stay at the library through the evening. For over a year, Ray walked the streets of San Francisco, immersed in physical pain and deep-set loneliness, and was supplemented by a sharp sense of fear and distrust of the unknown. During Ray's experience with homelessness, he spoke to no one. He reached out to nobody. He was embarrassed by his situation. He didn't feel that he could be good company. He gave up and blamed himself for what had happened to him, his health and his homelessness. He had no one to tell him otherwise. What followed was a downward spiral of negative thoughts, self-loathing, deteriorated coping mechanisms that left Ray feeling stuck, afraid, deservedly poor, and alone. I remember thinking to myself, I have no idea what I'm doing. I walked the streets and stayed away from people. There was a lot of not knowing, a lot of fear, a lot of embarrassment, a lot of loneliness, a lot of depression, all of that combined. I didn't feel like I could be good company to people. I didn't want to share what I was going through. The best way to say it was, I just gave up.
Thank you for sharing that. I think Ray's story resonates with me because I hear it so often told through other people's experiences throughout the years. And there's folks over at the Village now who can tell almost the same exact story verbatim of how it slowly just compounded, and then the loneliness, and then the desire to keep people away because of feeling very unworthy and depressed and just isolated, and it's a vicious downward cycle. And I appreciate you reading it for us.
And, you know, when we ask someone if they want to reconnect to their family, but then they change their mind, the most common reason given is they say, I can't, I feel dirty. It's like this internalized sense of worthlessness. So, look, I know this is depressing. I know this is not like an uplifting moment of the conversation, but there is a hope and silver lining in that, because at some level, if there's this internalization of shame around homelessness, we can play a role in changing that narrative, right? It's how we look at our unhoused neighbors, how we embrace them. And as I hope you saw in the video, one thing I hadn't, connected until seeing it, I haven't seen it in years, a lot of the folks that you see as experiencing homelessness, you wouldn't think they were experiencing homelessness at first, right? Like, we have a certain image of homelessness that's probably on the cover of the book, which is one of the reasons we put it on the cover. But homelessness looks a lot more like you and I than we realize. We see the most visible, upsetting, often difficult to reach manifestation of homelessness. Individual, chronic, homelessness, and often there is a much higher percentage of substance abuse, untreated mental health issues. I believe those individuals need as much support and care as we can offer, and we can talk about that. But there's a larger majority of folks experiencing homelessness that are doing everything they possibly can to blend in and not be seen as someone experiencing homelessness for the very reasons that Ray cited.
Right.
So.
Absolutely, and I will speak to that chronic population that's battling some mental health symptoms as well as some substance use. We do have those chronic folks residing over at the Village, and we are intentionally designed to serve that population as well. And one of my favorite stories that I didn't plan on sharing, but I do want to if you don't mind me having a couple minutes, is on Sundays, we have a coffee cart that we have for the folks attending church here that is ran by folks that live over at the Village. And we started out with actually using an espresso maker, and we wanted, to have really fancy coffees. But we watched it and we thought, well, we're not really trying to raise up a bunch of baristas. What we're trying to do is reintegrate folks back into community in that space. So we then moved to having just pour over coffee in that space. And how do you manage a line, and how do you deal with anxiety and social around that? But we were about 4 months into having this coffee cart when I came on a Sunday and someone came up to me and said, man, those houses have been over there for a while. When are you going to move people in? And I said, man, they've been in. We've been full for a while. You're holding a cup of coffee served to you from somebody that resides over there, but you expect to see something different. And so it was a very shocking moment for them and to check on their own biasness of what they thought homelessness might look like, and then what it looked like still in housing. And so I just kind of like to shock people sometimes and tell them these stories of what we see is our Neanderthal brain and our movies and media have us to be prepared and heightened to see the folks that potentially could cause us harm, right? It makes us alert to the people that are a little more animated, a little louder, a little bit more unwell at that time, because we're supposed to keep ourselves safe. That's our Neanderthal brain. But our compassion side can only handle so much compassion before it has to shut that down. So we don't notice the people that are quietly laying there sleeping, that are covered up with blankets, that look very clearly cold and alone. Our souls can't handle it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And my husband says that to me all the time. Do you have to work everywhere you go? Well, because I see it. Nobody else sees it. And there's a photo that I wanted Hunter to show of the two of us. I saw it on your social media, and then I found it on mine. We're both in our squat stance, but what I love about this photo is, what I don't love about this photo is all the people that are walking by us and that don't stop.
When I started this, I wanted with the GoPro thing to wear the camera just to see what it was like and kind of, fake it for, an hour or two. I couldn't even last 5 minutes. I almost had to explain to people, I'm not actually experiencing homelessness. I'm just, I'm not one of them. Like, I couldn't even get past it. It was so painful, so otherizing. That's a great reference point. And it's important to not otherize any group of folks experiencing homelessness. Untreated, the difference between folks on the streets and not, like, if you have housing, you have more of a chance to have treatment, to have support. There's a TED Talk, one of my favorite lines in the TED Talk is, the opposite of addiction is not recovery, it's connection. It's connection. And so the last thing we need to do is otherize and ostracize further folks who do have untreated mental health issues. Now, we have conversations on safety, public well-being, like there's valuable conversations to have. And I'm also not saying all this work around healing our humanity, relational poverty, is a silver bullet. This is not a one-size-fits-all. For some folks experiencing homelessness, family is part of the problem, not part of the solution. Individuals escaping domestic violence situations, young people who have been kicked out of their households for some aspect of their identity. So it's not to create this kind of Pollyannish, well, let's just love everyone and hug everyone. But I think until we get to a place where we know our unhoused neighbors as neighbors, have conversations with folks. And I invite volunteers, folks, if you're here tonight and you get into our Phone Buddy program, ask whatever question is on your heart to your unhoused neighbor. You can have any conversation. There's no dumb question, because that's how we learn as people. That's how we grow. And I think it requires having courageous conversations that probably we can't do on Twitter, right? It's too much of a thing. We have to have it kind of one-to-one and in small groups and with people we care about.
And I would say to our volunteers that do ask that, like, how do I talk to a person? You're right. There's no dumb question. And really, I have found that I ask dumb questions all the time, and they are just so receptive to understanding that I don't know, that they are the best expert, and I'm coming from genuinely a place of wanting to get to know you. And so they're not like, well, that's dumb, Kim. But sometimes they are. But it's in like that joking, warm way, because you're coming with just a desire to be with a person. And I think that goes with anybody you're meeting to have coffee, any stranger. It's going to be uncomfortable at first because they're new to you and you don't know what connects you and what you might find that you have a shared commonality with, and just go with that same open excitement of getting to know a person. And we can remove I'm getting to know the unhoused person or the unsheltered person. I'm just getting to know a person.
Yeah. Absolutely. It turns out when your unhoused neighbors get housing, they're no longer your unhoused neighbors, they're now your neighbors.
Weird.
It's such a fascinating concept, yeah. And I think what I love, just as a shout out for Goodness Village, when I started this work, the thing that was the most confusing to me, well, a lot of things were confusing, a lot of things are still confusing. One of the things that was really confusing is in San Francisco at the time, 2014, 2015, the basic mindset was permanent supportive housing or shelters. Those were the two options. Either, a housing unit that is, affordable housing with wraparound services, takes years to build, permitting, back and forth with local neighbors. There's a significant cost. It needs to be built. This is a best practice. Or let's put them in MSC South, 400 plus person congregate environment where you have to be in by 7 p.m., out by 7 a.m. You can't bring your partner, can't bring your stuff, can't bring your dog or your cat. And 45% of people experiencing homelessness have jobs, by the way, right? So forget what are you going to do trying to, leave early or come back late, tell your boss, oh, sorry, my homeless shelter has a curfew, right? Like, how's that going to look? And then you're in an environment in which everyone is there under the rubric of the homeless, from folks who have severe mental health issues that are untreated, LGBTQ youth leaving an unsafe home situation, folks who have, physical health issues. So I love that Goodness Village is finally the kind of housing where if you're housed and you look at a Goodness Village unit, you'd be very happy living there. We almost have to ask, would you or I want to live there? And if we can't say yes, we shouldn't be building it for people experiencing homelessness, because inevitably people aren't going to want to live there. They're not going to stay there. So yeah, I'm a big fan, and Goodness Village is in the book.
We made it to the book.
You're in the book. Oh, and in terms of conversation starting, I have a gift for all of you. It's not the book. I'm sorry. You have to buy that. It's $20, cash, Venmo. We'll sign some copies out there. But what I do have as a gift, though, is we have socks. And these are antimicrobial socks donated by Bombas. Meant to be worn in inclement weather or for days or weeks at a time, socks are the number one requested physical item on the streets. So it's a conversation starter. You see someone at a crosswalk or on the way to work, perhaps on the streets, walking by. Hey, my name's Kevin. I have a pair of socks. Would you be interested in a pair of socks? What's your name?
Socks are your gateway in, for sure. They're just, I've seen people wear them every which way you can, as many times as they can turn them inside out and wear them and rinse them and string them. Like they're a hot commodity, because if you wear your socks all the time, then you get the blisters and the cracking in your feet, and they're always walking, so they're getting blisters and they're getting infected. And so clean socks are everything. Thank you for bringing those for folks. I have more questions, but I also want to maybe just open it up to other people to ask questions, because do you guys have questions? Maybe raising your hands just to give me an idea if you do. Cool.
We'll have one. So we'll bring the microphone.
Yep. Miss Jackie and Jade are coming around with microphones. Go ahead.
So first, just before we dive into questions, okay, this is going to be my inspiring, hopeful moment for me. Y'all are giving me a gift here. So here's the Phone Buddy program. We have a wait list right now. Who here is interested in either learning more or maybe getting paired with an unhoused friend? 30 minutes a week, phone calls, text messages. All right, Colette, you see some hands going up. That's good. We're not asking for donations tonight. You could do whatever you want for the holidays, but it's having someone to talk to. We take it from best practice from the foster care youth space, which basically says every child needs someone who goes to bed at night, wakes up in the morning thinking of their well-being, that isn't paid to do so. That's the biggest predictor of whether a child goes through the foster care system, gets lost, or has a fighting chance. And I just don't think there's ever a point where we age out of the need to feel loved, to feel like we're somebody. So
I want to quickly piggyback on that, since we're recruiting volunteers tonight. But something that's very parallel to what we share with our volunteers is we do have the 24-hour mental health staff that's on site at the village. And I think that the people that live over there know that my staff love them, care about them, want to be there for them for whatever need that they might have. But also, they know that my staff is paid for all of those things. And so there's something very different and healing and important about volunteers that come in and spend their time investing and getting to know the people that reside over there. And so I just want to thank you for those that are volunteering in either of these programs, because it's incredibly impactful for the wellness and the recovery and just the reintegration back into feeling like you're part of the community and feeling like you are a purposeful human and valued and worthy, which, as we talked about with Ray, gets lost and gets buried below all the other self-critical dialogue that goes on in there.
Can you hear me okay? Last thing I just want to say, so I don't know the ins and outs of Goodness Village's initial proposal. I'm sure, there were some folks who maybe pushed back or had some concerns. But now that Goodness Village is here, I'm just more proud today to be from Livermore, having Goodness Village here. Do you feel the same way? Like knowing that a program like this is in our community, now it's a source of pride. It's a model to look at elsewhere. So I think that shows the values of the community. So
Absolutely. I think Livermore, the Tri-Valley in general, is just an amazing community. And had you asked me this 15 years ago, and my husband is here and he will tell you, he would tell me as we were coming to this church that we were going to use this land to help the homeless. And I said, I'd love to see the day that Tri-Valley allows something like that out here. And I was a naysayer, and here we are with 28 houses, and we're looking to expand it. And it really is. I encourage you to read this book, get to know really in depth what is going on as a society and what you as one piece of this society and this community can do for people, because it's a ripple that will change our world, and it saves lives. Okay, off the pedestal. Questions? I'm off.
We have one or two back here. Yes.
Okay, so not so much a question, but to be even more proud of Livermore, there are 5 shelters in the 5 cities of the Tri-Valley for the disadvantaged, the homeless, and the abused. All 5 are in Livermore. That's the heart that this community has. I'm very proud of it.
I love it.
Mayor Marchand, everyone.
Absolutely. Well said. Yes.
In your book, you mentioned kind of the definition of what we consider homeless, and you talked about people that are couch surfing, or maybe multi-families living in one house. I thought that was a great kind of awareness because, as you mentioned, our stereotype of what we believe someone should be considered homeless is very different. Can you expand on that more of like how we can use that to kind of help bridge some of the gaps of our awareness and biasness?
That's great. Well, what was your name?
Leslie.
Leslie. And did you already read the book?
So I didn't hold it up because I have Audible, so it was on the...
So you recognize my voice.
Yeah, it's great.
They had me audition for my own book. They were like, if he sounds like this, you're not going to do it. And I'm like, I don't, but... So it was an okay Audible experience?
Yes. You didn't put me to sleep when I was driving to and from work, so that's good.
and did you speed it up to 2x, or was it about 1.5?
I'm a 1x, 1x person.
1x? I can't even do 1x on my own. They have you speak it slow. That's an excellent question, and I'm honored that you listened to the book. Thank you, Leslie. So Leslie's exactly right. There's right now in the U.S., we have this definition of homelessness that I think is pretty flawed. We use typically, the HUD definition of homelessness. So HUD, Housing and Urban Development, their definition is about that it leads to about 582,000 people, call it 600,000 people experiencing homelessness over the course of the year. And the way that number is calculated, has anyone heard of the point in time count? Pit count? Yep. Okay. I see a few hands. So basically, on a night in January, each year usually, canvassers will go out with clipboards and they'll see a tent. And they'll say, hey, there's a tent. I think there's like 1 pair of legs in there. Well, it's closed. Let's call it 2. And then they say 2 people. And they'll go through a community, and these are volunteers often too. And you're literally, I've done this before, you're driving slowly with your windows down, saying, oh, look, there's a person experiencing homelessness. That's how the number's tabulated. And, they use some other stuff around shelter numbers and whatnot. I'm slightly oversimplifying it, but it is a gross undercount. And what you don't include is all the families doubled up, tripled up, folks who are out of sight, living in places not safe for human habitation, and a lot of families, and a lot of women, and a lot of children. And if you look instead at the Department of Education's definition, which they use to count for school children, to just see who's eligible for extra funding in different districts, then with that calculation, we estimate in the book that the number's actually closer to about 6 million people over the course of the year. So not on any given night, but over the course of the year, somewhere in the ballpark of almost 2% of the population in the U.S. will experience homelessness over the course of the year, and about 2.5 million of those 6 million are children. So again, there's this very small but very visible and upsetting segment of the homeless population that we all think of as the population. It's much broader and more complex. And that gets to Leslie's point, which is until we understand the complexities and stories and situations for 600,000 people even, there's 600,000 reasons for experiencing homelessness, causes. Until we get to that level of granularity and getting to know someone by name, we'll never solve this crisis. And just as one quick story, I haven't shared this one, it wasn't in the book, but I remember there was one of the ways to do that is cities developing what's called a by name directory. It's basically just having a very clear spreadsheet of everyone who's experiencing homelessness, and then having all service providers get together on a regular basis and talk through the sheet and say, Adam, Jeffrey, Sally, do we know, this is their challenge. So this was done in a community, I think it was in Rockford, Illinois, one of the communities that got to like functional zero around homelessness by some measures. And they were getting down to the wire, getting most people resolved. This person, they are just needing a plane ticket to reconnect to their family. This person, they're refusing housing of this type, but, they have a substance history, so we need to make sure they're in a clean and sober living environment. And then there was like one guy who just was, I don't want any services. Just leave me out here, right? Like kind of the story we're trying to push back on in the book, right? He's just like, I'm fine. I'm choosing this, right? And so they put their heads together, and eventually they knew this guy well enough in the Chicago area to know he was a major Chicago Cubs fan. And a few years ago, the Chicago Cubs made it to the World Series. They, were doing well. That was the year they were doing well. So they went to this guy, and they're like, hey, Bill, what do you think we get you a hotel room just for 2 weeks so you can watch the World Series? And we'll get you a Chicago Cubs hat, you'll enjoy it. And then afterwards, we'll bring you right back to the streets, and you can have your tent in this spot. And he said, yeah, sure, let's do that. So he's there, he's watching this little game, they win. They say, okay, World Series over. And he's like, I think I want to get housed now, right? This wasn't so bad. So I think, again, it's just knowing the real story that's extreme example, but just really understanding who the person is, what barriers they face, meeting them where they're at, but not leaving them there.
I have first of all, thank you for what you're doing. I've never heard of any of this until tonight. I have a 5-part question. One, how did you finance this? Who actually owns Goodness Village? How does a person that's homeless qualify for it? You said most of the homeless actually have a job. Do they have to pay some sort of small fee out of their earnings to live here? And is this expandable to larger cities like San Francisco, especially Los Angeles?
Okay, great questions.
I
had to squint. I was like, is that you, Dad? How do you get paid for this thing, So the first part on the financing, and then I think we can share on some of the questions.
Yeah, okay.
So we have 100% of our funding from individual donations as well as foundations. So we receive very little city funding, government funding, but we have received a lot of individual philanthropy. And then some of the foundations, the $2.1 million basic income pilot we have, about half of it is from Google.org. So they've put in some money. We work with the Wayfair Foundation, Broad Foundation, and then individual giving, $50, $100, from thousands of people can add up. So we're now a staff of 10 people full-time. So it's small but mighty nonprofit. So that's the financing question. What was the next one? About the facilities.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have any client-facing offices. So that's very unusual for an org in the nonprofit space around homelessness. We partner with organizations like Goodness Village, or frankly, if anyone here is part of a group that wants to partner with us, let's talk. Could be a food pantry, healthcare providers, law enforcement, police, fire, emergency dispatch, paramedics often understand this work intuitively because they're seeing the same people all the time. So we partner with healthcare providers, shelters, soup kitchens to do referrals. We hire staff members in local communities. We just launched a partnership in Santa Cruz where we hired a full-time staff member on the ground in Santa Cruz to offer reunion services and our Phone Buddy program to folks on the streets. And then we partner with groups like Goodness Village for referrals from caseworkers and social workers as well.
And then with Goodness Village side, we were started originally through a conversation with Supervisor Haggerty and the church itself. The church has 35 acres out here, and they were looking at what can we do with the land to help nonprofits in the area? What do we do for the folks in the valley that need help getting a little hand up, but also nonprofits. How do we help the nonprofits? Because land for offices is so expensive for them as well. So what do we do? And the houses were a project of theirs. I was brought in once the houses were here in order to create program and ensure that the village remained a healthy, stable environment for the people that attend the church, as well as for the people that live over there. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've worked with our unhoused neighbors since 2005. So the program is based off of my experience working from street outreach to shelters to Housing First projects. I've worked for San Joaquin County as well as for Alameda County, and I've worked in some locked facilities, including the jail. And so the program itself was designed off of these really connective community situations and facilities, but made for folks who live outside and who can have their own key and choose to be involved in their recovery process, rather than be sent there and told how long they're going to be there by county officials. We are currently funded by the same folks, private foundations, private donors. We do have some small funds from the city and then through the state as well. Replicable, it will be different anywhere else because, again, 35 acres of Crosswinds is very different. How do we create vocational programs that will be more high-rise if we were San Francisco or Oakland, right? We have to be more capacity in small space rather than this individual houses that we have. In places that we could do the tiny houses, that's preferable because people like to have the individuality of their own homes and that space, and that's great where we're able to do that. And in other places that we have to build up, it's really about the staff. No one stays in the tiny home because they love the four walls. They're just four walls. They stay because the community that we're building around that and the care and attention that my staff provides that really help people reconnect into the greater macro community again. And in the way to some will transition out and some will stay with us for as long as they desire to stay with us. And some do work. A lot of our folks are on SSI or SSDI, so they have disability. They pay 30% of their income to stay at the village. Yes.
Okay, a couple more questions, and then we got a lot of food out there, too, so y'all need to bring...
I just had a question. You talked about the different definition of homelessness and the people that you see and the people that are couch surfing and so forth. Sometimes you hear, well, some percentage of the people actually choose to live that way. And in your experience, have you actually really ever found somebody that says, hey, I like living outside and not having any responsibility? It just seems like a little discontinued. It just doesn't seem like that would be the case.
Excellent question. So the short answer is almost no one. And I'd tell you if it was otherwise. 10 years of doing this work. You hear occasionally from a young person that they're choosing, I'm couch surfing, I'm kind of van dwelling, I'm traveling. But even then, it's so intertwined with trauma. It's like, is it a choice to not have a family member, hurt you, and therefore you don't live in that household? Like, you're making a choice, but it's not a good choice if it is a choice. And I think the number that I always look to that I think immediately pushes back on the is it a choice conversation, which I know you're asking about, which again, a great question. In the Bay Area, 70% to 80% of the people experiencing homelessness in the Bay Area are from the Bay Area. our unhoused neighbors were once our housed neighbors. And if you include California and look statewide, it's closer to 80 to 90%. So 9 out of 10 people who are homeless in California were once housed in California. So again, that pushes back to me against the idea that, oh, the weather's good and the services are good and whatnot. So.
Right. I would piggyback that. In fact, I just did a raging post yesterday about that same comment because there are people that say, oh, they're choosing to be homeless. And I would argue that no one is choosing to be homeless, but they might tell you that because it's their defense mechanism for all the other different layers that go with them accepting that housing opportunity. That really takes, we need to build a relationship with the person and find out what those fears are or what those barriers are and create a space where they can transition in, such as it wasn't maybe that the person got the hotel and got to watch the game, but that somebody listened to I like sports. And then they took that an extra minute, they got to know me as what I was involved in, and they probably have seen me a few times during that 2 weeks. They didn't just put me in there and walk away, but they used that as an opportunity to get to know me, and now I feel safe with you. And now I know that you're not just gonna put me in those 4 walls and leave me there and have me isolated with whatever's going on in my own head and my thoughts and my demons from being outside, but that I have somebody to walk my life with now, and I'm going to trust you for my next journey.
Well said. Yes. Young lady in the front.
Based on your story from Ray and the question we just heard, 2-part question. How do you approach someone? What words do you use to get them to open up and talk to you? And if one of us were to try it, what could we offer them once we even did connect with them? Is there something we could say, well, you should talk to Goodness Village or go to the city? Because knowing human nature, they wouldn't. They need to have something probably in their hands. What would you do? And what would we say?
Yeah, it's a great question. We can tag team this as well.
All right,
so
let's go.
One of my staff members actually at Miracle Messages had this really brilliant response to that the other day. So the way I usually do it is I don't think it's more art than science, you know. I usually would say, you know, hi, my name is Kevin. What's your name? You know, and then I'd ask, how are you? But my colleague said, well, asking an unhoused person, how are you? They may be having a decent day, but they, you know, are facing a lot of challenges. So maybe it's not the most sensitive question. They said, well, maybe you say, what are your plans for today? And then it kind of creates this kind of nudge to what's going on in their life, what's happening today. I thought that was a really thoughtful thing. So shout out to Nellie on our team. You know, I think when the first time I met someone experiencing homelessness in broad daylight to wear the camera and do it as a volunteer, as I approached them, I instinctively reached my hand into my pocket and grabbed my keys and held them as a weapon. And that's where I started 10 years ago. So I share that not because I'm proud of that, but because this is really deep-rooted in us, right? Like I'm a 6'2" guy walking around in broad daylight, downtown San Francisco, meeting someone who was introduced to me through a mutual friend, and I felt compelled to grab my keys and hold them as a weapon, which I've never done, ever before or since. So I think thinking, you know, doing whatever you can to have that first engagement, if it means going with a friend, going with a group, if it means going to a shelter initially, or maybe Goodness Village. I'm sure we could talk about days or events to bring people to start just kind of easing into almost conversations with folks who maybe, you know, have experience of homelessness, have lived experience. Joining our Phone Buddy program and asking your friend, that's a great conversation for the friend. You know, how would you approach it? What would you not ask? But generally, I found that really having the right intention, you know, looking someone in the eye, smiling, approaching in daylight, you can kind of gauge whether the person is going to be receptive or not. Like, you know, you're not only walking by them as a passerby, you're maybe walking by their home, their shower, their bedroom, right? And so if they don't engage or don't want to talk, or you don't feel, the point of the book isn't to say, part 2, when we stop walking by and talk to every single person we meet, right? It's going to happen. But it's really just being more conscientious about what is happening. If you interacted, or maybe if you didn't interact, like, was it because of fear? Was it because of some kind of uncomfortableness? So those are a couple of thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree, and I love that you said that, because about it being their house, because that's how I've always looked at it too. We are inviting them ourselves into their home, and on their worst day and without warning. So I always like to kind of watch just from a little bit. I'm taking in the scene, right? Are they kind of just chilling, just hanging out? Do they look a little triggered and elevated, right? You can kind of tell by the posture. And so I'm watching that to see if an approach would be right that day. If it's not, I'm still going to walk by and I'm going to say, hey, how you doing? And keep on moving. I'm not going to wait for the response, because it's not a good one. But I'm going to come back maybe another day, and they're going to start to see my face as I'm a warm person that's interested in how they're doing. And then if one day there's that look up and that notice that they remember my face, I'm going to say, hey, can I get you a cup of coffee? And then I'm just entering into that space, because then I'm invited in by the response. So giving them ownership of, is this the time? This is your home that I've put myself into. And it takes time, and that's why I think the outreach workers are your best bet, unless it's a place that you're going to frequent a lot. So calling them and saying, do you just know maybe that this person is over here, so that they can go do those relationship building things. But if it's a place that you're going to consistently be frequently and you're going to see them often, just starting with a friendly smile and working up to it. Hey, I got these socks. You need these socks, and just short and sweet. And I wouldn't expect any of them to immediately, your first chat, to be like, yes, I'll take everything that you're giving me. It's, you're asking them to be vulnerable and raw with you as well. And so folks are also doing the same thing to you. They're watching you. Are you a safe person to invite in my home? And if they say no thank you to the things, they have their reasons for saying no thank you. And I think one of the stories there's a woman that I know really, really well. She's lovely, very, very good spirit, great soul. She called me up one day and said, I tried to give this guy an apple, and he just threw it back at me and said, no, thank you. And she's like really upset and offended by it. And I said, well, did he have teeth? And she said, oh, I don't know if he had teeth. I said, well, because he's got to bite into that apple somehow. I said, does he have access to a bathroom? Because apples have high fiber. So there's things that they can't access that we're forcing upon them. And you talk about that in your book, about our own privilege and putting it on folks, and then taking the rejection personally when it's their experience and they are their best experts on their life. And yes, they could have politely said no thank you, but maybe you're the 5th person that tried to give them the dang apple, So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll just, we'll close here in a moment, but I'll read the relevant section because, Leslie, do you remember the story of Tanja in the book, the lady with the tacos? Okay, I called you on the spot. Yes, I do. Okay, great. That's awesome. Thanks, Leslie. So here's the story to jog Leslie's memory. The section is in paternalism, which I think is my favorite chapter of the book. I don't, have favorites, but it is my favorite. So basically the setup is there's a man named Ronnie who I knew experiencing homelessness, was an amazing artist, marathon runner. And one day I asked him, what's your plans to get housed? And he said, oh, I have housing if I need it. Like, I have housing offered to me. And I kind of looked at him like, well, Ronnie, you're living in a tent. Why wouldn't you go to the housing? Like, what's wrong? And he kind of, was real patient, just kind of looked at me and said, well, Kevin, the housing is available to me in a part of town and in a building where drugs are present 24/7. I have an addiction history. If I go into that house, I'm going to relapse and die. So I'm waiting for senior housing in a few years, and hopefully we'll make it till then. And suddenly, it went from me judging him, like, what's wrong with this guy, to, well, that's a really logical, that makes a lot of sense. That's actually a respectable reason for refusing housing. So the contrast to that story, has a homeless person ever refused food you've offered them? So I found this online, and this is a story. So this is a woman named Tanja, and the post that she wrote relaying a story about, I'll just get into it. Months ago, 3 of my children, my husband and I, were at a taco/Mexican grocery store. Okay. And a man who seemed very homeless sat outside with a sign that said, "I will work for food, help, please, anything will help." So my 9-year-old wanted to help so badly. We ordered him 2 tacos with rice and beans with a Coke and water bottle. The man seemed irritated and told my son, "No, I only want money." My son still tried to tell him to save it for later and keep it anyway. The homeless man refused, which absolutely crushed my son's big heart. I was so mad, I told my son, "See, some people just want drugs." We then just took the drinks and tacos home. It's been months since, and neither he nor I have given any homeless person anything since. I tend to give out cold water bottles at lights, but I haven't been recently. Okay, so I wrote and then let me skip here. There could have been many explanations for why the person refused them. Perhaps he didn't like tacos, he had an upset stomach, he had just eaten, he slept poorly the night before, he only saw the Coke and he was diabetic, he was preoccupied with finding work or getting more money for a hotel room for the night, or, he felt emotionally raw at the sight of a young boy who reminded him of his own son. Or, for some unknown reason, maybe the meal would have caused him more harm than good, or perhaps he just wanted to trick some sympathetic parents and their children into giving him money so he could buy drugs, as Tanja suspected. Who knows? The more important question is not whether a particular individual experiencing homelessness can offer a satisfactory explanation for declining a meal or a housing option, but why we feel entitled to make this assessment in the first place. Would we invite a similar level of interrogation on our decisions of what to eat, where to live, who to date, how to interact with passersby, or how to spend our money? How would we feel if someone presumed they knew what was best for us and our families better than we do? Tanja's reaction, "I was so mad, I told my son, see, some people just want drugs," provides a clear example of the deeply rooted paternalism and prejudice we exhibit toward our neighbors experiencing homelessness. Often subconsciously, we tend to presume that people experiencing homelessness do not know what is good for themselves and can't take care of themselves. Otherwise, why would they be homeless? So we must tell them what they need. So, don't be like Tanja, which I know you're not, but it's so important to get past those harmful stereotypes. I think I just wanted to share, and kind of in closing, meeting people where they're at but not leaving them there. We created the first basic income pilot for unhoused individuals in the country. We didn't talk too much about that tonight, but you can take a look in the book. In our initial pilot, 2/3 of unhoused neighbors secured housing from $500 a month over 6 months. Small sample size, 14 people, but 2/3 got housed. They used the money better than I could have used it for them. So that's why we're expanding into a $2.1 million basic income pilot. And, maybe the last thing I'll just share, so my calls to action and then a final little story, is then we got food and we got to eat. And I'll sign books. Who's getting a book? Yay, all right. So now we got to do another selfie, right? Okay, so calls to action, please. Volunteer with Miracle Friends, Phone Buddy. Who are we again? Who's going to sign up, Phone Buddy? All right, there we go. So sign up on the spreadsheet. And if you're interested or just on the fence, just put your name down anyway, and we'll send you information. No commitment. Second, sign in the books. Third, get to know a neighbor experiencing homelessness as a neighbor. Between now and end of the year, that's really my call. And spend time at the Goodness Village, because this is an incredible space and community.
And our neighbors have the opportunity to also get phone buddies. So if you volunteer there, you may also
get a
end up
match.
with a neighbor at the village. And it's a good way to just start to feel comfortable having conversations with folks.
Yeah. And then the last call to action. So if you do get the book, Goodreads, Amazon reviews makes a huge difference. So please, if you use those sites, make a review. Honest review is great. And then I'm on social media, Kevin F Adler. So let's be in touch, because my instant messenger things, or direct message is open. I want to hear from you. I want to be in touch. Let's keep the conversation going. Okay, last 2-minute story I have to share because it relates. Okay. So my uncle Mark was the first person who I had a personal connection to on this issue of homelessness. But it turns out he wasn't the last. So I was doing this work 5 years in, and this isn't in the book, but just as a story. And there was a man who was a former NBA player experiencing homelessness at a shelter. And he wanted to reconnect to his son. He had been in Ireland. He's an African-American gentleman. And met a woman. They had a child. He wasn't accepted. There was a falling out. And he hadn't seen his son in 20 years. Okay? And so he records this message. And I met him the next day at the shelter. And we start talking. And he said his name. And I was like, his name is really familiar. So I kind of sat there. He finished his message to his son, and his name was Eddie. And I said, Eddie, out of curiosity, do you have any ties in the East Bay, in the Tri-Valley? And he said, yeah, I do. I said, well, do you have any ties to Livermore? And he said, yes, actually. I have strong ties to Livermore. And I looked at him, I said, Eddie, you were my middle school basketball coach at Christensen. You coached me as a basketball player. I hadn't seen him in years, and we gave each other a big hug. And we were able to find his son, and they were able to get reconnected. And that's why we do the work. And I'll just share, I thought I'd never meet someone outside my uncle, then it's all these folks. This is part of my family too. And so when we think about homelessness, it's not us and them. It's that someone's son or daughter, brother or sister, uncle or aunt, and perhaps even one of your classmates, friends, or family members. And the last thing I'll leave you with is neuroscientists at Princeton and Duke did research, and they found that the part of our brain that activates when we see a person compared to an inanimate object, it's called the medial prefrontal cortex. That part of the brain has been found not to respond when we see someone that we perceive to be in an extreme outgroup in our society, including people experiencing homelessness. The parts of our brain that activate when we see someone experiencing homelessness are not the same parts of our brain that activate when we see each other. It's, I think, the left insula and the right amygdala, which are the parts of our brain associated with disgust. If you see vomit, that's the part that's activating. The real-world implications of this. The New York City Rescue Mission did an experiment a few years ago where they had individuals dress up to look homeless as members of their very own families walked by. Not a single person recognized their own son or daughter, brother or sister, mother or father, husband or wife as they walked by them on the streets. And I've often asked, would I recognize my own loved ones on the streets? Probably not. But I know I need to do the work and commit to doing the work to make sure I have the best chance to do so. So, thank you.
Yes. Well, because every time I see you, I forget to ask you to sign my book. I need you to do that before you leave. And can we just thank him for coming all the way out here? Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for listening to the Goodness Village podcast. Production and recording done by our operations team here at the Village. Music was created by Club 88 member AJ Parr. If you want to know more about Club 88, this podcast, or Goodness Village, visit our website at gvlivermore.org. And thanks again for listening to The Good Pod.